June 3rd, 1944, outside Caen, France. The first light of dawn struggled through the gray clouds, casting long shadows across the churned fields. A farmhouse sat abandoned yet eerily intact, its windows broken, paint peeling, roof sagging. Inside, a group of German officers gathered around a wooden table cluttered with maps, empty coffee cups, and scattered shell casings. Their boots scuffed the floorboards as they leaned over a rifle laid out before them. An unfamiliar, gleaming weapon captured from a minor American patrol days earlier. Hauptmann Otto Kruger lifted it, turning the polished walnut and steel in his hands. His smirk was smug, almost theatrical. "So this is what they armed their infantry with," he said, his voice cutting through the dim light. Too heavy, too complicated, wasteful. Laughter erupted around the table. Oberlieutenant Dieter Vogel mimed firing the weapon rapidly, exaggerating each motion. "No discipline," he said. "They waste ammunition like children playing with toys." Kruger passed the rifle along. Each officer examined it with skepticism. The semi-automatic M1 Garand, with its 8-round N-block clip, moved with a smooth, almost eerie precision. They compared it with their trusted Carabiner 98K, bolt-action rifles that required deliberate, measured shots. Their doctrine demanded patience and controlled fire. The Americans, they thought, were sloppy, reckless, and bound to waste both men and ammunition. Outside, the first distant thrum of artillery reminded them that war was never far. Yet inside, arrogance reigned. They could not know that in days, the same weapon they mocked would turn ordinary infantrymen into unstoppable machines of fire and redefine the very rhythm of battle. June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy. The surf pounded relentlessly against the landing craft. Smoke and fire streaked across the sky, mixing with the briny scent of salt water and fear. Private First Class William Harris gritted his teeth as the Higgins boat's ramp slammed down. Water crashed against him, chest high, every wave threatening to sweep him back into the channel. He clutched his M1 Garand, mud and water dripping from its stock, knuckles white, arms trembling with cold and adrenaline. The deafening roar of German machine guns cut through the cries and shouts of men around him. He hit the sand and dropped prone, heart hammering, ears ringing with the cacophony of war. Snap, click, bang. The Garand barked, 8 rounds fired in rapid succession, each finding targets through the chaos. The Germans had expected hesitation, but this was no pause. Another clip slammed home, another burst of controlled fury. The Americans surged forward, step by step, wave by wave, every soldier a storm. Across the beach, Obergefreiter Brenner watched in disbelief. The Americans weren't cautious, they weren't faltering, they were relentless. His MG-42 spat lead, red-hot barrel glowing. But the rhythm of the semi-automatic M1s overwhelmed his men's reactions. The once laughing Germans now saw fear reflected in the eyes of their peers as they were cut down. The tool they had mocked was a weapon of transformation, ordinary men made deadly by design and discipline. By the time Harris's squad reached the seawall, the sand was littered with bodies, smoke drifting across the battlefield. The metallic ping of ejected clips rang out repeatedly, a sound unfamiliar yet terrifying to the defenders. Laughter had long since vanished, replaced by the steady beat of inevitable destruction.
June 10, 1944, Saint-Lô, Normandy. Hedgerows rose like walls of green fire, dense and deceptive, hiding death at every turn. Sergeant James Donnelly and his men crouched behind a collapsed stone wall, pinned by German fire that shredded foliage and churned mud into the air. Every heartbeat seemed to echo louder than the last. The weight of the M1 Garand in Donnelly's hands was more than physical, it was the line between life and oblivion. He raised the rifle, firing in 8-round bursts, each shot precise, each clip cycling automatically. The German defenders, trained for measured, deliberate fire, faltered under this new cadence. Oberfeldwebel Dietrich Müller barked orders to conserve ammunition, but the Americans' rhythm was relentless. Every burst suppressed, every shot fell like thunder, and the hedgerows slowly yielded. The M1 Garand was no longer just a rifle. It was an orchestra of destruction, each soldier a conductor of its deadly symphony. As dusk fell, the hedgerows had been breached. German units scattered into pockets of resistance, bewildered by a weapon that refused to relent. Kruger and Vogel, observing from a distant barn, saw the Americans' relentless firepower with growing horror. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by a dawning understanding. The tool they had mocked was a force multiplier beyond imagination. Corporal Hans Richter, a young German soldier, ducked behind debris, eyes wide as the Garands continued their rhythmic assault. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "One rifle, and every soldier is a machine." June 18, 1944, near Saint-Côme-du-Mont. The battlefield lay silent for the moment, a deceptive calm after 2 weeks of relentless fire. Smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of cordite, wet earth, and iron. Hauptmann Kruger sat among the ruins of a farmhouse, his uniform torn, face smeared with soot and blood. Before him lay the M1 Garand, mud-caked but functional. He picked it up, testing the bolt, the smooth action, the feel of weight balanced perfectly between stock and steel. This was a weapon built to endure chaos, to turn panic into controlled destruction. Outside, the metallic ping of clips being ejected echoed across the fields, each one a heartbeat of inevitability. Kruger's diary lay open beside him, ink smeared, mud marking its pages. He wrote, "I laughed at their rifles. Now I see, it is not a toy. It is a machine of war, and it has taught me the meaning of fear." Across the battlefield, American soldiers moved with the same relentless rhythm that had defined the past 2 weeks. Each M1 Garand fired with a mechanical precision, each man an equalizer of life and death. The Germans who had once mocked them now whispered in fearful respect, realizing that no doctrine, no engineering superiority could counter the combination of speed, reliability, and human determination amplified by this single weapon. By the evening, Kruger understood what General Patton would later declare. The M1 Garand was the greatest battle implement ever devised, not elegant, not perfect, but devastating in its simplicity. In the mud, the smoke, and the shattered hedgerows of Normandy, the Americans' toy guns had rewritten the rules of infantry combat forever. The morning fog hung low over the shattered fields of Normandy, softening the edges of destruction, but not the terror within it. Private First Class Samuel Reynolds crawled forward through the churned mud, M1 Garand gripped tight, sweat mixing with grime. Every step was a negotiation with death. The splintered hedgerows hiding German machine gunners, the scent of cordite thick in the air, and the distant groans of wounded men echoing across the shattered terrain. Ahead, a group of American soldiers rose in unison from a shell crater, rifles thundering in perfect cadence. The M1 Garands barked repeatedly, each shot a punctuation mark against the chaos. Behind the smoke, German troops scrambled to respond, firing bold actions in desperate bursts. Their rhythm was deliberate, methodical, precise, but it was too slow. The Americans' semi-automatic firestorm overwhelmed every defense, pushing lines forward before the Germans could reload or regroup. Reynolds felt a sharp crack tear past his ear and instinctively rolled, pulling the trigger in a seamless, almost instinctive sequence. The rifle's ping resonated behind him as the spent clip ejected, and he shoved in a new one without hesitation. Around him, the battlefield moved like a living organism, men advancing, bullets tearing earth, smoke swirling through shattered hedgerows. Each American soldier became a node in a network of fire, each M1 Garand an instrument of relentless pressure. Across a ruined farmhouse, Hauptmann Kruger and Oberlieutenant Vogel observed the advancing waves through cracked binoculars. Faces pale and drawn, they whispered among themselves, disbelief etched into every line. "They don't pause," Kruger murmured, voice tight.
It's not possible." Vogel shook his head. Every man, every rifle, every clip of ammunition seemed to fire in perfect rhythm. The same weapon they had mocked days earlier, the toy gun, had transformed ordinary men into something far more dangerous than any German officer had anticipated. In the hedgerows nearby, Sergeant James Donnelly's squad pressed forward. Tracer rounds stitched the air with fire, cutting paths through the smoke. He saw a young German soldier, barely 18, diving behind a toppled tree as bullets tore the ground around him. Donnelly hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because of fear, but because of awe. The M1 Garand in his hands was an extension of himself. Each pull of the trigger was the precise execution of something larger than individual effort. His men advanced in lockstep, their rifle fire creating a rhythm that dictated the tempo of the battlefield itself. Elsewhere, Corporal Hans Richter ducked behind a hedgerow, gripping his Mauser 98K with trembling hands. The rifle, once a symbol of German precision and reliability, now felt sluggish, inadequate. Every time he raised it, another burst from the Americans forced him lower. He could see the Americans coordinating fire without speaking, their semi-automatic rifles producing a relentless cadence that shredded his carefully drilled defensive formations. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, This is not a rifle, it is a machine." Artillery shells tore through the air, shaking the ground beneath the advancing Americans. A young lieutenant, kneeling in a shell crater, directed his squad with precise hand signals. M1 Garands barked continuously, men reloading without hesitation, each clip adding to the symphony of destruction. From the German perspective, it was disorienting. This was not a battle fought in pauses and measured steps, but in waves of fire that seemed infinite. The Americans dictated every engagement, controlling the tempo, the timing, the very essence of combat. By midday, several hedgerows had fallen. German forces scrambled, attempting to form defensive pockets, but the rhythm of the M1 Garand made cohesion nearly impossible. Kruger, observing from a distance, could barely comprehend the scale of destruction. Every report that arrived confirmed what he had feared. The Americans were advancing faster than anticipated, firing without pause, taking ground with surgical precision, and surviving in numbers that defied expectation. Private Reynolds paused for a moment, crouched behind a shattered wall, taking stock of the battlefield. He glanced at his M1, mud-smeared and scarred, yet flawlessly functioning. He realized that the rifle was not simply a weapon, it was the lifeblood of his survival, the reason he and his comrades had endured. Around him, men continued their relentless march forward, bolts cycling, clips ejecting, every movement in harmony with the rhythm of fire that defined this battle. Elsewhere, in the German rear, officers recorded their observations with grim faces. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Weber read dispatches detailing the Americans' unrelenting progress, the destruction of key defensive positions, and the psychological impact on German troops. Each word underscored a growing reality. The M1 Garand had turned the battlefield into a new kind of war, one where traditional tactics and precise engineering alone could not compete with speed, rhythm, and human resolve amplified by superior firepower. Even as night fell, the Americans continued their advance. Shadows of soldiers moving through smoke-streaked hedgerows painted a surreal picture of controlled chaos. The metallic ping of spent clips echoed faintly, like a metronome marking the passage of inevitability. In these moments, the battlefield was both terrifying and beautiful, a theater of human courage choreographed by a weapon that demanded respect. Back in a ruined barn, Kruger finally lowered his binoculars. His face, once confident and mocking, was now etched with fatigue and dawning realization. He whispered to Vogel, "We laughed at them, at their rifles, and yet it is not a toy. It is a force beyond our reckoning." Vogel nodded silently, eyes fixed on the advancing troops, knowing that the semi-automatic weapon had rewritten every expectation they had held about infantry combat. By the close of day, the Americans had secured several key positions, their casualties minimized by the M1 Garand's efficiency, their fire unbroken by the chaos around them. The Germans, once arrogantly confident, were forced into retreat, their formations shattered, their morale shaken. The battlefield bore the marks of transformation, not merely in the ground churned and cratered, but in the psychology of men who now faced a weapon they could neither ignore nor counter effectively. In the quiet hours of dusk, Kruger wrote in his mud-stained diary, "I held it, and I laughed. Now I understand. One rifle, and every man becomes a machine. The war has changed in ways we never imagined." The soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division moved through the lingering smoke, rifles raised, eyes scanning, hearts steady. Each M1 Garand fired with purpose, every clip ejected a testament to design, discipline, and human endurance. On this day, in the mud and chaos of Normandy, a weapon once mocked had demonstrated its true power. It had transformed ordinary men into an unstoppable force, and it had forever altered the art of war.